relationship with the right referral partner could be a game changer for any B2B company. So what if you could reverse engineer these relationships at a moment's notice? Start a podcast, invite potential referral partners to be guests on your show, and grow your referral network faster than ever. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show. Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Robert Johnson. He is the co-founder and CEO over at TeamSupport. Robert, how's it going today, sir?
Logan, it is going great today. So much fun having a chance to talk to you today and talk about TeamSupport.
Absolutely, sir. So we're going to be talking about how to take a data-driven approach to customer support. You know, as you and I were chatting offline on this show, we've taken a lot of time to speak about a data-driven approach to marketing, data-driven approach to sales, but customer support, customer service, and success, I think, maybe get the short end of the stick when it comes to taking this data-driven approach. So I'm really excited for you to share some tactical advice for folks in how they can leverage a lot of the data. The good news is a lot of it is there for the taking in the platform that they may be using. So we'll get into that in a second. But for some context, for a little bit of lead up, Robert, give us a little bit on your background and what you and the team at TeamSupport are up to these days for some context.
Sure. We founded TeamSupport just about 11 years ago with the mission of being a B2B focused customer support platform and primarily for technology companies. My background is running other software companies, and one of the things that I realized is that there really wasn't a tool out there designed for that type of company. I do think that the customer support for the B2B world is vastly different than for the B2C world, and we've created the industry's leading B2B platform for customer support. So it's been a great ride. We've had a lot of fun doing it, and we're growing like a weed, so life is good.
Awesome. Well, what you mentioned there, actually, you teed me up for my opening question for you is, you mentioned that customer support in a B2C environment is different from a B2B environment. And, we talk a lot in the marketing world about how we can learn lessons from B2C and approach it more like B2C in a B2B environment. But when it comes to customer support, there are some very distinct differences that you like to call out from B2C to B2B. Can you speak to those a little bit?
Sure, I'd love to. As I said, it really is, there's several fundamental differences between B2B support and B2C support. And my background's always been B2B. I've really never been a B2C guy, so I really understand the B2B market very well. And I think it's absolutely important that we treat it differently. So several things that are different in the marketplaces. Number one is that we are looking at, and this is going to sound obvious, but when we talk to a customer, we're not talking to an individual, we're talking to a corporation, and the customer really is that corporation. So we need to understand the relationship at the corporate level, which is going to include a lot of different individuals across potentially multiple divisions in a company. So understanding that relationship at a company level is absolutely critically important. One of the things that really makes TeamSupport different goes back to the very first architectural decision we made in the product going back to 2008. In most customer support systems, the core construct is the ticket. In TeamSupport, the core construct is the customer, because that's the single most important thing. Solving tickets is great, but understanding the relationship and improving the relationship with that customer really is the most important thing. A couple of things that are important on the B2C side, on the B2B side, is that the volume of tickets generally in the B2B side is lower than the B2C side, but the complexity is much higher. If you think about a normal transaction in the B2C world, It's going to be high volume, simple questions, repetitive questions that get asked over and over again. Generally speaking, in the B2B world, it's not that way. It's going to be more complex questions, but a lower volume of those questions. Finally, on the B2B side, each potential interaction has potentially a lot more value associated with it. Again, if you think about a B2C transaction, one individual consumer for most brands is not a material conversation. If a consumer walks from a brand and says, I'm never going to do business with that company again, most companies aren't going to care too much. However, in the B2B environment, if $1 million recurring revenue client walks, that's a major and material event. So the level of materiality on each interaction is potentially much, much higher on the B2B world. So again, we set out in 2008 to build the preeminent B2B customer support tool and have had a great success doing that over the last 11 plus years.
Yeah, I love those three specific components that you talk about there, and the complexity and the stakes being higher are two that really stand out to me, because if you are going to look at customer support being different in B2B, you need to understand a number of the dynamics affecting the relationship. There can be more dynamics at play, and as you pointed out, more complexity. So what is some of your advice, Robert, for customer service and customer support leaders when it comes to managing all those different dynamics of the relationship and applying data to it so that they can manage them effectively, because it is so complex at the same time?
As I said, in the B2B world, it's much more about understanding the relationship with that customer, as opposed to in the B2C world, where it's probably more about first call resolution, ticket times, and managing it very, very efficiently. Of course, efficiency is important in the B2B world from a support standpoint, but again, let's go back to that relationship. So as far as managing the relationship with data, understanding the potential distress of that customer is key. So in TeamSupport, we have a cool tool. It's a cool tool called the Customer Distress Index, or CDI. And it actually measures the level of potential distress with a company. And we do that through a really cool algorithm that actually measures the average of all the customers and looks at the standard deviation of one customer compared to the rest of the customer base on a whole bunch of different factors. And so from running that algorithm, we can rise up to the top the customers that we perceive to have the most distress. And we call it the Customer Distress Index because on the customer support side, we really never get a chance to look at customer happiness. Nobody ever calls the customer support department and says, hey, we love you guys. Things are going awesome. Just want to let you know that. Thanks. Goodbye. Click. That phone call has never happened in the history of customer support. We always get the complaints, the issues, the questions. So we always get the distress. And our tool, CDI, allows us to measure that and report on that. And then what most of our client companies do is use that as a way to understand where to deploy resources, how to best treat that client, and how to potentially change that interaction with that client. So that's one of many tools we use in TeamSupport to allow our customers to use data to better understand, manage, and improve the relationships with their customers.
Today's growth story is about a brand we all know well, Airbnb. When they were trying to maximize growth among work travelers, Airbnb knew they needed to develop and execute a content strategy to reach multiple personas at different stages of the customer journey. Enter HubSpoke.Marketing. HubSpoke managed creative content development and crafted a custom publishing process that allowed Airbnb to develop more content in less time. The end result? A lot of content across multiple channels, all strategically nurturing leads through to conversion. Within the first 6 months, Airbnb nearly tripled the number of companies enrolled in their Airbnb for Work program. They also saw huge increases in user adoption, with work travelers booking longer stays and more guests per booking. If you're looking for strategic content at scale, I've got a hunch Hub and Spoke can help. Head over to HubSpoke.Marketing/growth to schedule your consultation with a content specialist today. That's HubSpoke.Marketing/growth. All right, let's get back to the show. Yeah, and I think the methodology there is worth pointing out, because when you mention your index that you mentioned, the CDI, Customer Distress Index, as you guys call it, I think of other tools, other reporting methods to gauge customer satisfaction, like Net Promoter Score, NPS, those sorts of things. And, as you and I were talking offline, you mentioned that, those things are important. You want to measure those. Those have, great implications, but specifically in customer success, customer service, and customer support, you're dealing with customers when they are at that distress point. And so you want to manage the ones that are in the greatest distress. So I love the way that you guys are tackling that. And I think that mindset shift of thinking about overall customer happiness, but then looking at the other end of the spectrum and how can you, improve both to move the pendulum, on both sides, I think makes a lot of sense. You mentioned a little bit there, Robert, on reporting. I imagine that there's some regular advice that you guys are giving to customer support leaders where they may have some low-hanging fruit of data that they could just be looking at a different way or changing the way that they collect it that could give them some insights that might yield some specific changes that could be big levers for either customer happiness or reducing that distress, right? What are some of those areas where you see folks can change the way that they look at data or the way that they capture data and then leverage that for a vast improvement in customer support?
Sure. Let me go back to the last point just for 1 second, though. It's we talked about the CDI, and you brought up NPS and some other survey data as well. And that's all absolutely critical. It is, as I said, the CDI really looks at just one section of that customer relationship. And we're big believers in also looking at things like NPS, things like transactional surveys, and getting that holistic view of that customer. So it's the CDI is really one data point there, which we incorporate with a lot of other data points to try to understand that overall relationship. And it's there's no one tool that gives you all the insight in the customer. We're working on it. We love that idea.
Yeah, Robert, I mean, it goes back to what you said earlier is that, the relationship in the B2B environment is more complex. And so what you're saying here about having multiple tools to be able to capture data about different aspects of the customer relationship, just reinforces that point you made earlier. I'll let you speak to kind of the data question and some of the reporting things that customer support leaders might want to be thinking about then.
Yeah, the data, obviously having a lot of, any customer support system, you've got a lot of data locked up in the system and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of interactions with customers is a treasure trove of potential data. Right. And the ability to look at that and really mine that for intelligence becomes a very, very valuable tool. So just a couple kind of basic examples. One thing that's fairly easy to do, certainly in team support, is to look at a histogram of days of week and times of day of when your customers are contacting you. So from that, it's become literally about 3 clicks to understand what time of day is very busy. So you can, from a staffing perspective, start understanding, okay, we need to start the day earlier, start the day later, or stagger lunches, for example. Let's say we have a spike at 12 to 1. Well, we might want to move the lunches around. So we have either lunches earlier or later, so we don't have the whole staff gone when we're seeing a big influx of tickets. Similarly, one of the things that we've done is we actually have a customer support operation in Cape Town, South Africa. And we use our own data to understand that we had a lot of issues and customer questions coming in from both in North America in overnight, but also in a lot of our customers in Europe and Asia as well. So we were able to open up a customer support operation in Cape Town to be able to address those, again, based on the data that we have within team support.
Yeah.
The other things we can do, kind of going back to the survey stuff, is we have the ability of doing essentially a ticket closed survey. So we can understand, again, there's lots of different ways to do surveys. You can do NPS, we certainly have the CDI, but this is a very transactional survey. Every time a ticket closes, we send a very basic survey out that says, essentially, we said 3 faces: happy face, neutral face, and frowny face. And it's a snapshot gauge of how that particular interaction went. But we can measure 2 things. Number one, it helps us measure the relationship with the client. And actually, feeds back into the CDI, but also helps us to understand the agents as well. If we have agents that have continually very, very high percentage satisfaction from customers and agents that have very, very low satisfaction with customers, that's obviously a point for management to go in there and say, hey, let's figure out what's going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love that example there of very tactically just looking at a simple data point, right? Of when are tickets coming in and then how can we staff around those? Or, in your case, a little bit more extreme than moving lunches around, opening up a new office. But that can affect some large company decisions if you look at the data. And I love the way that you pointed it out, that the data that you have in your customer support platform is a treasure trove of intelligence. And if you're looking at it the right way, you can use it very powerfully. Speak a little bit more too, Robert, for customer support leaders listening to this, in looking at how they manage CSMs. Again, it might be a little bit different if maybe they come from a B2C background and now they're managing their agents in a B2B environment. Are there some dynamics there that you think folks need to call out and be thinking about when it comes to managing their customer support team in a B2B environment?
Very much so. So on the B2C, as we talked about, it's much more about volume, speed of closure, efficiency of agents, and things along those lines. In the B2B world, it's much more about customer satisfaction, the relationship with those customers, and ensuring that you are getting that customer to, especially in the subscription world, to stay and potentially expand as well. So in many ways, the skill sets from a manager, but also from an agent themselves, are different between the two. Again, B2C, much more volume, much more rapid closing. B2B, much more relationship driven. So when you're looking to hire and manage agents in the B2B world, one of the things we really focus on is that ability to drive that relationship. And I think that's absolutely critical in the B2B world.
Yeah. Anything else you want to add, Robert, in some of the new technology that folks are leveraging? As you and I were talking offline, you mentioned something about sentiment analysis in a part of your platform that you guys are leveraging. It seems like not only the data, but merging AI with all of this volume of customer information, customer input. There are some opportunities to add some technology that folks might not necessarily be thinking about yet in how they can improve those relationships. Coming back to the main point of managing relationships in customer support in B2B, that's been a common thread throughout this conversation.
Sure. 100% agree. What the data that we have in a customer support role in team support should never be locked up. That data is absolutely invaluable. And it saddens me to see we go to some potential clients of ours, and they don't have that data exposed. They don't really understand what information they have. So our ability to report on that and understand that really is a key point of differentiation for our tool. But one of the things you referenced was we've got a great integration with IBM's Watson. And what that does for us is allows us to do sentiment analysis. So we can actually understand the intent and meaning of a customer's interaction with us. Obviously, as a human, we can look at an email or a chat and pretty quickly understand, okay, are they mad or not? And that's easy to do with one ticket or two tickets. The problem is you get hundreds of thousands of tickets coming in and 1,000 agents looking at those interactions. The ability to categorize that numerically and essentially turn sentiment data into numerical data is immensely valuable. That allows us to look at, again, the relationship with that customer. We can look at all the interactions across all their tickets, potentially across all the different divisions we may be supporting, and see if their sentiment is broadly trending better or worse. Are they happy? Are they frustrated? What does that look like? Again, easy to do for a human looking at one or two tickets, very difficult to do when you've got, again, potentially hundreds or even thousands of agents across millions of tickets to understand that. So, again, going back to the theme of data, the ability to use that IBM's sentiment analysis has been a great data tool for us.
Yeah, that's really cool that you guys have built that integration, Robert. And it points to this common trend, right? Of we're swimming in data, but it's really we need it organized. We need it. We need the ability to analyze it and take action based on the organization of that data. And so, as you were talking, I was picturing kind of viewing customer sentiment trending up or down, and lo and behold, that's exactly where you went with that. And so, I think for customer support leaders, one of the big takeaways is, how can you get to that? How can you start to organize the data and apply some analytics to it in some form or fashion so that you can look at the key components and how they're trending? And it kind of came back to, as you talked about within customer support, distress, and not only just customer happiness, but looking at different key points along the pendulum of that relationship with the customer become very, very important. Robert, this has been a great conversation. I love the experience and the tactical advice that you brought to customer support leaders listening to this today. If anybody listening to this would like to reach out, ask any follow-up questions with you, or just stay connected with you and your team, what's the best way for them to go about doing that?
All kinds of different ways. Obviously, the website, TeamSupport.com. You can reach me on Twitter at TeamSupportCEO. Email rjohnson@teamsupport.com, and LinkedIn as well. So I am agnostic to how you contact me. So I appreciate it.
Awesome. As you said, make it easy. Lots of different ways. Robert, this was a fun conversation. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Logan, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun and great way to spend 20 minutes or so. Thank you so much.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.